We've been sitting here for a long time, and you have yet to tell us why you're the leader for this position. I was caught off guard. I hadn't thought of what to say yet when someone else piped in. Yes, I want a leader that's going to tell us where we're going. Like, take this hill and I'll get behind you and we'll go, but you haven't told us. Are you changing the vision of what we're doing? Are you sticking with the vision that we have? Why won't you tell us which way you're leading? I remember sitting there thinking, I've not been asked how I was going to lead. So as I sat there, I realized how I lead is not the way these two guys probably want me to lead. But I had no formal training in leadership theory or leadership styles or leadership approaches. And so I shared from my heart how I felt I would lead moving forward. They had known me well enough that they had seen some of my track record and how I led. So I kind of re-described that and we moved forward, and I kind of hoped for the best. Maybe you've been caught in a situation like that. Maybe you've been stuck going, how do I lead? How should I lead? I've had great leaders and I've had bad leaders. I've had people I want to emulate, people that I want to imitate, but then there's people that I don't want to be like, but I don't know really how I lead. Some of you may have dreamed and said, if I was in that spot, here's what I would do. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about leadership theories, leadership approaches, ways that we can begin to understand some of the dynamics of leadership across different genres of work, across different cultures and organizations. And so I'm going to talk to you specifically about 5 different leadership theories. But before I do that, I will tell you a little funny story that when I started studying and looking at different types of leaders and different leaders that had those particular styles or followed those particular theories, I quickly realized there probably was really only one leader that we needed to be like, and that was Mahatma Gandhi. It seemed like everything I read, people would say the person that uses this approach is Mahatma Gandhi. And so I'm joking, that's not the way that really is, but there are times where you may find that leaders use multiple approaches. There may be certain times in their life where they're a certain kind of leader and they grow and they develop. There are other leaders that kind of remain stagnant and do the same thing their whole life, and sometimes that works for the industry that they're in. But I want you to begin thinking, as we walk through these approaches, to think about the leaders that you've worked for. I want you to think about the kind of leader that you're wanting to become. I also want you to listen and find that there may be attributes or pieces of each of these theories that you utilize a little bit. So take some time and think as we walk through these. I'm going to describe 5 different leadership styles. They are the great man theory, the skills theory, the behavioral theory, the situational theory, and last but not least, the leader-member exchange theory. Now, these 5 theories are very helpful. They're very different. Some of them rely very heavily on things that are innate within a person that you can't change, you can't do anything about. Some of them move towards skills or knowledge or behaviors that you can develop. And so we'll talk through that a little bit more and what your theory may be on that. So for the great man theory, there are 2 people that are talked about a lot. One is Julius Caesar, the other is Gandhi. I promise you I won't talk to Gandhi anymore after this particular slide. But the kind of the phrase that goes with this is leaders are born and not made. In the great man theory, people are seen to have been born with certain innate gifts, that they're just natural born leaders. You've probably heard that phrase used before. From the time the kid was a little kid, when he would do stuff, other kids would follow him. Other kids would follow her. They would do exactly what she did. They wanted to be like her. And so we begin to say, oh, this child must be a leader. Maybe the case, might not be the case, but that's the way the world used to function and operate. The good news with that is there tends to be continuity in leadership, because the person who's been leading is followed by their child who tends to lead like they do, perhaps, or has learned skills from their parents that people thought were innate. The downside with this is that if you're not born into a family or a social caste that is seen to be leadership worthy, you're just kind of stuck. Sorry for you. You may have leadership skills, but you're not going to be called into leadership because you just don't have it. That's the downfall and pitfall of this particular theory of leadership. The next one, the skills theory. Skills theory says leaders have skills that need to be developed or can be developed. 2 people that are talked about a lot are Martin Luther King and Alexander the Great. Now, Martin Luther King and Alexander the Great are extremely different in that Martin Luther King was born into a family that was very poor. They were a marginalized people group. They were not people who were really in the America that he grew up in. They didn't have the ability to move up the social ladder like some people could. Alexander the Great was born into royalty. His dad had been the king of Macedonia. And so now what ends up happening is he gets tutored by Aristotle. He learns how to grow. He learns how to gain knowledge. But what he really had was a skill for war. He knew strategies. He knew tactics. He studied them. He learned them. He developed new ones. And so those skills continued to develop in him. Martin Luther King showed at an early age he had the ability, he had the skill to speak. He had the skill to have a vision. And his orator skills combined with his vision allowed him to paint a dream for America that 70 years later we're still talking about today and still aspiring to. Philip of Macedonia's son, Alexander the Great, grew the greatest empire that the world had known at that particular time. The struggle with the skills theory of leadership is that at times a leader can begin to rely too heavily on those skills. And while the good news is the skills can be developed, sometimes we need to change skills when the organization grows or when things change. But oftentimes leaders can rely on the skills that got them to where they are and they don't want to change. And it ends up hurting the organization, hurting the company, hurting the country that they're trying to lead. The next approach, the behavioral approach, says leaders are made and not born. You can develop leaders, not just the skills, but leadership within people. You can help them begin to understand how your organization functions and operates. You can build into them, and they can begin to develop as the company develops what needs to happen. There are two different, very different people. One's Steve Jobs, one's Elon Musk. They both use a behavioral theory as they work. Steve Jobs is a little more transformational in his approach, and in his approach or his style, what he kind of looks for in people is the ability to see the future. How are we going to move forward? How are we going to develop the new skills? How are we going to encourage that so we can continue to move forward? Elon Musk is a little more authoritarian. It's like, hey, I know what's going on. He's an extremely smart guy, but he hires other smart people to then tell other people what to do so they can get moving fairly quickly. So these two approaches are good within this particular behavioral style of leadership. But the downfall can be that at times we look at the behaviors that we like so much that we forget some other nuances that are going on within the company. Other things that might be going on that we need to adjust to, that we need to fix, but we're so fixed on the behaviors that we want to see that we miss out sometimes on some pretty glaring things. So we need to be careful about that. The next one is the situational approach. And in this approach, leaders adapt to situations, especially for multinational companies or people who work in foreign affairs and government. You're walking into different situations all the time with people who want to be led differently, with cultural norms that may be different, when things that are going to be a little bit different. And so two people that fit this are Indra Nooyi and Colin Powell. Indra Nooyi was born in India and moved to the United States, went to Harvard, graduated, went to work for Johnson & Johnson Company eventually in their global works, and then came back to work for PepsiCo in the United States and worked her way up to become the CEO. Now, while the CEO of a global organization, she worked with people in all sorts of different levels, and she had to learn in each situation how she would adjust her leadership to that particular situation. Colin Powell had the same thing as a military leader, then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and eventually Secretary of State. He had to learn how to go in and out of different types of situations to perform negotiations, to lead, and to push people forward, and sometimes be a military leader and just tell you what to do. At other times, work through some of the fine details of treaties. And so each time he stepped at a table, he had to figure out what that situation was and how he needed to lead at that particular time. The good news about this style of leadership and this theory is that you can go into different situations with different styles of leadership and learn how to apply them. The good news is there are some models that help you figure out what situation you're in, because it can be very difficult for the leader to figure out how to lead. That's part of the pitfall. Is what if the leader guesses the wrong style of leadership when they walk into a situation? So the good news is there are some models like the Hershey-Blanford situational model. There's a couple others that would help us identify 4 different situations we may walk into and which of the 4 different leadership styles go with each of those different situations, so that a leader can begin to identify, okay, what is this situation? And the model helps them understand, and then they know how to apply the particular situation or style of leadership that they need in that particular situation. So that's the benefits and the downfalls, pitfalls of the situational style. Last but not least is the leader-member exchange. The leader-member exchange is probably the most relational of all the leadership theories. It's not looking at situations. It's not looking at the company. While it may look at those things, it's looking at the individual and leading the individual. What is said here is not just leaders adapt to situations, but leaders adapt to each individual that they lead. So as we look at these types of leaders, Oprah Winfrey, Barack Obama would be two great examples of these kinds of leaders. They've led great organizations like Harpo for Oprah. And then Barack Obama, of course, was the president of our country. And as they led, one of the things that's unique when you talk to people who worked with them or knew them was not just their great vision and what they could do, but how they could sit down with people individually and bring them on board and work with them and find out the need that that person had and how they needed to be led to help them move forward with the vision that they had together. It's a very, very difficult skill to learn, and that's one of the downfalls. Is it's difficult to learn, and the second downfall is you have to have reciprocity from the other person. The other person has to agree that I'm going to follow you. Now, that's true with all leaders. We have to have people that will follow us. But the leader-member exchange, or leader-member exchange rather, becomes a little more difficult because you are working one-on-one with people, and people that choose not to work with you can cause you to develop very quickly those who are in and those who are out, those who are following your leadership and those who aren't. And it can cause some friction within the corporation or the organization. The other great thing is that people are heard. They're listened to. They understand what their role is because they have the ear of the leader and they know how to follow him or her and have trust in them. So as you've heard these 5 different styles, I'm going to go back to the question that we had at the very beginning. I don't know if you remember what that was, but the question was this: how should I lead? It's a great question for you to begin to listen to begin to understand, because it's my hope that you never end up in a situation like I did, where I was stuck behind the 8 ball trying to figure out, how would I lead? How do I lead? So studying leadership styles and approaches can help you learn that so you can be confident in your leadership and figure out how to apply that in different situations throughout your lifetime and throughout your career.